On the evening of May 3rd, 2007, the seaside town of Praia da Luz in southern Portugal was quiet, almost peaceful. Families were finishing dinner, tourists were returning to their hotel rooms, and nothing suggested that this night would become one of the most infamous disappearance cases in modern history. Inside a holiday apartment at the Ocean Club Resort, three young children were asleep in a small bedroom. Their parents had left the apartment only moments earlier, confident they would return soon. The balcony door was slightly open, the lights were low, everything felt normal. Kate and Jerry McCann were dining with friends at a nearby restaurant, less than a minute's walk away. They took turns checking on their children, believing this routine was safe. They had done it before. That night, nothing felt unusual. Nothing raised alarm. At around 10 p.m., Kate McCann walked back to the apartment for another routine check. She pushed open the bedroom door and instantly knew something was wrong. The room felt different, too quiet, too empty. The bed where her 3-year-old daughter Madeline had been sleeping was empty. Her blanket was gone. The window was open wider than before. In that moment, fear replaced confusion. Madeline was not there. Kate ran back to the restaurant, screaming a sentence that would echo around the world. "They've taken her!" Panic spread instantly. Friends ran, staff froze, guests stared in disbelief. Within minutes, the resort was in chaos. Local police arrived, but precious time had already passed. The borders were still open. The night was still alive. Whoever had taken Madeline, if someone had taken her, was already moving. Searches began immediately. Apartments were checked, streets were searched. Dogs barked in the darkness, but the night offered no answers, no witnesses, no clear signs of struggle. By morning, the story had spread beyond Portugal. A blonde British child had vanished without a trace. Media crews arrived, headlines exploded. A private family nightmare had become an international mystery. That night in Praia da Luz was not just the disappearance of a child, it was the beginning of a case filled with unanswered questions, mistakes, theories, and shadows, questions that years later still remain unanswered. The first hours after Madeline's disappearance were filled with confusion and disbelief. Parents, friends, and resort staff moved through the night without direction, driven only by fear and urgency. People searched places that felt logical and irrational at the same time. Closets were opened, cars were checked, empty apartments were entered without permission. Everyone hoped for the same impossible outcome, that the child was simply hiding somewhere nearby. As minutes turned into hours, the reality began to sink in. This was no misunderstanding. This was no mistake. Madeline had not wandered off. She was gone. The local police began asking questions, but answers were few and unclear. Timelines conflicted, details were uncertain. In the darkness, memory became unreliable, shaped by panic and shock. Some witnesses reported seeing a man carrying a child earlier that night. Others remembered nothing at all. Descriptions were vague, faces blurred. The night had swallowed whatever truth existed. Roads leading out of town were checked too late. Airports remained open. Borders were not closed. Whatever chance existed in those first moments slowly disappeared with every passing hour. Meanwhile, Kate and Gary McCann remained trapped between hope and terror. Every sound felt like a sign. Every shadow looked like movement. Sleep became impossible. By dawn, exhaustion had replaced adrenaline. The town awoke to police tape, searching officers, and unanswered questions. Praia da Luz no longer felt like a holiday destination. News of the disappearance spread rapidly. Phones rang constantly. Authorities informed higher agencies. What had begun as a local emergency was becoming something far bigger. And as the sun rose over the quiet streets, one truth became impossible to ignore. This case would not be solved quickly, and nothing about it would ever be simple. Within hours, journalists began arriving in Praia da Luz. Cameras filled the streets, microphones were pushed forward. A local disappearance was transforming into a global headline. Images of Madeline's face spread rapidly across television screens, newspapers, and the internet. Her smile became instantly recognizable. Her name was repeated in every language. The media pressure was relentless. Reporters camped outside the resort. Questions were asked again and again, often before investigators had answers. Every movement of the parents was observed, recorded, and analyzed. Soon, the case reached the highest political levels. British officials contacted Portuguese authorities. International agencies became involved. Diplomatic conversations replaced private grief. Public sympathy poured in from around the world. Vigils were held, posters were printed, donations funded search efforts. Hope was being organized, measured, and broadcast. But as attention grew, so did speculation. Experts appeared on television, theories multiplied. Every detail became suspicious. Every silence was interpreted. The parents' behavior was dissected endlessly. Their words, expressions, and decisions were turned into evidence by strangers. Grief became performance, judged by those watching from afar. Meanwhile, investigators struggled under the spotlight. Mistakes were made, opportunities were missed. The urgency to act collided with the pressure to appear in control. What had started as a search for a missing child was now a complex media storm where truth, rumor, and emotion mixed without boundaries. And somewhere beyond the cameras, beyond the headlines, the central question remained unanswered. Where was Madeline? As the investigation continued, the tone around the case began to change. What once felt like universal sympathy slowly turned into doubt, and the focus shifted in an unexpected direction. Portuguese investigators started questioning the parents more intensely. Their statements were revisited. Small inconsistencies were magnified. Routine questions became interrogations. Soon, rumors began circulating in the media. Anonymous sources spoke of new theories. Headlines suggested possibilities that no one wanted to consider. The idea that the parents themselves could be involved entered public discussion. The moment Kate and Jerry McCann were officially named suspects, everything changed. Public opinion fractured. Supporters defended them fiercely, while critics grew louder and more suspicious. Every action became controversial. Every public appearance was judged. Grief was no longer private. It was scrutinized, measured, and compared against expectations. The media fed on the division. Talk shows debated guilt and innocence. Online forums exploded with speculation. The case became a battlefield of opinions rather than facts. Investigators followed multiple paths at once, but progress remained limited. Evidence was thin. Timelines remained unclear. The truth refused to surface. For the McCanns, the pressure was relentless. They faced not only the loss of their child, but also the weight of suspicion played out in front of the world. Trust between authorities and the family eroded. Cooperation became strained. What should have been a united search turned into silent confrontation. And as weeks turned into months, the case drifted further from its origin, a missing child, into something darker and more complex, where blame often replaced answers. As time passed, the investigation began to slow. Leads dried up. Witnesses disappeared. The urgency that once drove every decision slowly faded into routine. Search operations were reduced, then quietly stopped. Evidence that once seemed important lost priority. Files grew thicker, but clarity did not. Official statements became vague. Authorities spoke carefully, avoiding conclusions. The case entered a phase defined more by absence than action. For the public, attention shifted elsewhere. New headlines replaced old ones. The world moved on, even as the mystery remained unresolved. For the McCanns, time did not heal. Each year brought anniversaries instead of answers. Hope became something fragile, carried forward through effort rather than belief. Occasionally, new tips surfaced. Sightings were reported in different countries. Each lead reignited hope only to collapse under scrutiny. Investigations reopened, then closed again. Jurisdictions changed. Responsibilities shifted. Progress remained elusive. Behind the scenes, disagreements between authorities slowed cooperation. Trust was limited. Information was withheld. Silence became institutional. Madeline's image continued to age digitally, a reminder of time passing without truth. A child frozen in memory while the world grew older. Years later, the case remained unsolved, not because it lacked attention, but because the truth had slipped through every attempt to grasp it. Years after the disappearance, when the case had almost faded into history, a new development brought it back into the spotlight. Investigators announced they were focusing on a new suspect. This individual had lived in the area at the time of Madeline's disappearance. He had a criminal background, and he had drawn attention in unrelated investigations years later. Authorities began re-examining old evidence through modern technology. Phone records, travel data, and witness statements were reviewed with fresh eyes. The announcement reignited global interest. Media outlets returned to Praia da Luz. Headlines spoke of a breakthrough. Hope cautiously returned. For the McCanns, the news reopened wounds that had never fully healed. It offered the possibility of truth, but also the risk of renewed disappointment. Investigators were careful with their words. They emphasized that this was not a conclusion, but a direction, a lead, not an answer. Searches resumed in targeted areas. Locations once overlooked were revisited. The past was being searched for clues it had refused to reveal before. Public reaction was divided. Some believed justice was finally approaching. Others remained skeptical, shaped by years of false starts. Despite renewed effort, concrete proof remained elusive. No definitive evidence emerged. Questions continued to outweigh facts. Still, the case had changed again. Silence had been broken, and for the first time in years, the story was moving forward rather than standing still. Despite renewed investigations and public announcements, the case continued to resist closure. No arrest was made. No charges were filed. The truth remained just out of reach. Authorities released limited information, careful not to compromise ongoing efforts. Every statement was measured, every word chosen to avoid false expectations. The suspect remained under scrutiny, but the evidence available to the public was incomplete. Speculation filled the gaps left by silence. Over time, theories hardened into beliefs. People chose sides. Some were convinced answers were finally near. Others believed the case was already lost. The media revisited old footage, replayed interviews, and reconstructed timelines once again. The past was recycled in search of clarity. For investigators, the challenge was enormous. Years of delay had eroded physical evidence. Memories had faded. Opportunities had passed. The family continued to wait, caught between hope and acceptance. Living with uncertainty became a permanent condition. Public interest rose and fell with each update, but the core mystery remained unchanged. Madeline was still missing. The case had become more than an investigation. It was a symbol of failure, endurance, and unanswered questions. And as time moved forward, one reality became clear. Knowing what is missing can sometimes be more painful than knowing what is lost. Years have passed since that quiet night in Praia da Luz, yet the question at the heart of the case remains unchanged. Time has moved forward, but answers have not followed. The world has aged, technology has advanced, investigators have changed, but the space left by Madeline's absence has never been filled. For some, the case represents a failure of systems meant to protect the innocent. For others, it is a reminder of how fragile certainty can be. Hope still exists, but it is quieter now, less dramatic, carried not by headlines, but by persistence. Somewhere the truth exists, known by someone, hidden by fear, or buried by time. Whether it will ever be revealed remains uncertain. The McCanns continue to live between memory and waiting. Not knowing where their child is or what happened to her is a reality without resolution. This story has never truly ended. It pauses, resumes, and pauses again, shaped by time rather than conclusion. Madeline McCann is more than a name in a case file. She is a reminder that some mysteries do not end neatly. And as the cameras fade and the final words are spoken, the same question echoes once more, one that has never found an answer. Where is Madeline?